The Shadows over Taxes, a Gothic tale in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. The arrival I must begin by stating, though my heart quails at the confession, that my coming to the city of taxes was not of free will, but of necessity. My affairs in the northern states had unraveled into ruin, and a certain legal inheritance, dubious yet alluring, summoned me to this forsaken place. It was late October when I crossed the low bridge over the muddy Brazos River and first beheld the city. The sky sagged heavy and low, a ceiling of tarnished lead pressing upon the crooked rooftops. The streets were narrow, their stones uneven, and lined with buildings whose facades leaned like drunks toward one another, as though conspiring in whispers. The air carried a scent that I could not place, part rotting vegetation, part burnt sugar, part something far more sinister, which I dared not name. The wind moved sluggishly, as though reluctant to stir whatever clung here. It was nearly dusk when I reached the address bequeathed to me by my late cousin Elias, 14 Bleecker Street. 2. The house it rose from the ground like some vast, brooding sentinel, a structure of brick and blackened wood, its windows narrow and long, its gables jagged against the bleeding sky. The place seemed to possess a mind, no, a mood, watching me with the disdain of a predator toward prey already snared. The great door was unlocked, and when I stepped inside, the air struck me like a damp hand against my face, heavy, cold, and saturated with the odors of dust, mold, and age-old secrets. Velvet drapes hung limp and colorless along the hall, their folds deep enough to conceal unseen forms. The floorboards groaned underfoot, but with a tone less of complaint than of warning. In the center of the hall stood a mirror, taller than a man, framed in black wood whose carvings writhed into forms my mind refused to fully recognize. When my eyes met the glass, my reflection was not wholly my own. My features were present, yet subtly altered, my eyes set deeper, my mouth drawn in an unfamiliar line, my skin pale as wax, and, though I shudder to write it, my reflection's lips trembled upward in a faint smile, while mine remained still. 3. The whispering that night, in the upper chamber, I lay upon a bed whose mattress sagged as though something far heavier than myself had long occupied it. The wind outside rattled the windows like skeletal fingers upon glass. Somewhere deep in the house, a slow, intermittent dripping sounded, though there were no pipes and no rain fell. I do not know the precise hour when I woke, but the moonlight had shifted to a pallid silver, and I felt a breath, warm, slow, deliberate, upon my ear. Then came the whisper, so faint I could almost believe it had issued from within my skull. "He is still here." I sat upright, the bedclothes clutched to my chest. No one stood beside me. Yet the air was charged with a presence, an unseen gaze that weighed heavily upon my mind. 4. Elias in the corner. On the second night, the whisper returned, no longer singular but layered, a chorus of voices speaking as one, all murmuring of debts unpaid, of blood unburied, of a black door in the cellar that must never be opened. It was then that I beheld him. In the farthest corner of the chamber, shrouded in shadow, stood a man, tall, lean, clad in the same dark coat my cousin Elias had worn in life. His face was pale, his eyes unblinking, his mouth set in that same half-smile I had seen in the mirror. "You will finish what I began," he said. His voice was not the voice I remembered, but something deeper, a tone that seemed to echo in my ribs. The descent I cannot say whether I obeyed him of my own volition or under some spectral compulsion, but before dawn I found myself descending into the bowels of the house. The steps downward were slick with damp, the air thickening with every step until breathing felt like swallowing liquid shadow. At the far end of the cellar stood the black door. No ordinary carpentry could have birthed such a thing. It appeared less constructed than grown, its surface veined with something like roots or veins that pulsed faintly in the lamplight. My hand, traitorous, eager, closed upon the iron handle. That which weighted the door did not creak. It sighed, as though relieved at its own unsealing. Beyond lay not darkness, but a substance, black and dense, like ink made of night itself. It moved, breathing, shifting, whispering in countless voices. Faces formed in that depth, their eyes wide, their mouths frozen in silent screams, and then, God preserve my sanity, Elias stepped forward from within it. His skin shone with the wetness of that black tide, his eyes void yet filled with intent. Behind him, shapes stirred, long-limbed, crooked, hungry. I tried to flee. My legs refused. The tide swelled toward me, cold and wet and eternal. 7. The streets that shift. The last room, long-form Stephen King style version. Lena Holbrook didn't plan on staying in Dry Creek. She wasn't even sure if it was a real town until she saw the sign, a battered green thing with peeling white letters, half covered by weeds. Dry Creek, PLP 742. Her bus had broken down 2 miles outside it, coughing and wheezing like an old smoker before finally giving up entirely. The driver, a big man named Ray with sweat stains blooming under his arms, had grunted something about mechanical trouble, and said they wouldn't be moving until morning. He suggested the passengers find themselves a bed somewhere. Lena didn't know anyone. She didn't have much money. But she did have the creeping, gnawing feeling that sleeping on a dead bus in the middle of nowhere wasn't a good idea. So she slung her backpack over her shoulder and walked into town. Dry Creek was the kind of place where the sidewalks were cracked, the street lamps buzzed faintly, and all the storefront windows seemed to have dust baked into the glass. She passed a closed diner with a flickering neon sign that read "Eat." Just that, like a command. A black dog sat on the steps outside the old post office, watching her without blinking. At the corner of Main and a street with no signpost, she found the boarding house. The landlord. The building was tall, narrow, and painted a weary shade of green. A single porch light glowed above the door, making the moths dance drunkenly in the beam. Inside, the air smelled of boiled cabbage and something sharper, ammonia, maybe. The landlord was a wiry man with long, bony fingers and a neck too thin for his head. His thinning hair was slicked flat, and his eyes kept sliding away from her face. His name, according to the tarnished brass badge pinned to his vest, was Mr. Grigg. "Full up," he said when she asked for a room. "Come on," she said. "Just one night. I'll be gone in the morning." Something passed over his expression, a shadow of a shadow. His tongue slid across his teeth. "Well, there's one room. All the way down the hall. Not usually rented out." "Why not?" "Drafty," he said too quickly. "People complain." When he handed her the key, it was heavier than it should have been, as if it were cut from a chunk of lead. Cold too, like it had been sitting in ice. The residence. As Lena made her way to the stairs, a voice called from the sitting room. "You're taking the last room?" A woman sat in a faded armchair, knitting something dark and shapeless. She was in her 60s, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and her eyes had the wet gleam of someone who spent too much time staring out of windows. "They always put newcomers in there," she said, her needles clicking. "Never stay more than one night." Another voice came from the corner, a man in his 40s wearing a stained undershirt. He had the look of someone who'd been chewing the same thought for years and couldn't quite swallow it. "I was in there once," he said. 15 years ago. Still dream about it." Mr. Grigg's voice cut sharp across the air. "Mind your business, Carl. Mind both your businesses." Carl shut up, but Lena noticed he kept glancing at her with something between pity and warning. The upstairs hallway was long and narrow, with faded rose-patterned wallpaper that had turned the color of old tea. The floorboards didn't creak when she walked. They let out little sighs, as though something underneath was breathing in rhythm with her steps. The numbers on the doors descended in neat brass plates. 6, 4, 2. Then the hallway stretched on farther than it should have, the light dimming, until she came to the last door. Number 0. The room inside, the air was thick and stale, as though it had been bottled up for years. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, buzzing faintly. There was a bed, a tall mirror facing it, and nothing else. She turned toward the mirror, and froze. The bed in the reflection wasn't empty. Someone lay there. Someone who looked exactly like her. Same jacket, same jeans, same tired slump to the shoulders. Same faint bruise on the wrist from where the bus door had snapped shut earlier that day. The figure's lips pulled into a smile, though its eyes stayed shut. The night Lena tried to sleep, telling herself it was just exhaustion and the tricks of bad lighting. But she dreamed of drowning, not in water, but in something thicker, blacker. It clung to her, filled her lungs, wrapped her in a cold embrace. When she woke, the sheets were damp beneath her fingers. Not with water. The fabric shimmered in the moonlight like it had been soaked in oil. She sat up quickly, and saw the figure from the mirror sitting on the bed across from her. It didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. She scrambled for the door, but there was no handle on the inside anymore. From the dark slit beneath the bed came a sound. Slow, measured, steady. The sound of her own breathing, the ending in T. The Hollow Bell of Asheford, a Gothic tale in the style of Edgar Allan Poe. The invitation. It was during the waning days of an unseasonably warm November when I received the letter. The envelope was of thick, yellowed parchment, sealed with a black wax crest in the shape of a bell. Inside, in a spidery hand, were these words: Jonathan Harrow, you are the sole surviving heir to the estate of your great-uncle Silas Ashford. You are requested to take possession of Asheford Hall at your earliest convenience. The property stands in the township of Black Hollow. I had no memory of this uncle, though the name Ashford stirred something unpleasant in the dim recesses of my mind, a recollection of hushed conversations, of family members glancing over their shoulders before speaking. Yet, burdened by debt and lured by the prospect of ownership, I journeyed by train and then by coach to the township, which lay in a valley perpetually shrouded by mist. 2. Asheford Hall. The hall stood upon a hill above the village, its silhouette jagged against the bruised sky. A single crooked spire rose from the western wing, within which, I was told, hung the hollow bell, a relic cast centuries ago, said to toll of its own accord when death approached the household. As I approached the front gates, I noted that no birds sang here, and the grass upon the lawn grew in patches as if poisoned in irregular shapes. The facade was blackened with mildew, its windows tall and narrow, like watchful, suspicious eyes. The caretaker, a gaunt man named Craven, met me at the door. His skin bore the hue of old wax, and his speech came in a hoarse whisper, as though unused to conversation. You will find the hall altered, sir, he said. It remembers. 3. The bell tower. The interior was grand, but in a way that inspired dread rather than admiration. Long corridors faded into shadow, portraits hung crooked, their subjects rendered with unnerving precision, each gaze following me with an almost human patience. It was on my second night that I heard it, a faint, metallic thrum from far above, as if the wind had caressed a sheet of tarnished brass. Craven's face blanched when I mentioned it. The hollow bell has not been struck by man in over 70 years, he said. It rings when the hall is displeased. 4. The library. Driven by curiosity, I explored the hall's vast library. The books smelled of rot and damp, their leather covers curling like old bark. In one corner, I found a diary bound in black cloth, the writings of Silas Ashford himself. The entries grew increasingly incoherent, speaking of a voice within the chime and faces in the metal. In the final entry, the words were scrawled with such pressure they tore the page. It wants a name. It will take mine. Or yours. V. The toll. On the third night, a storm swept over the valley, and at midnight the hollow bell tolled. The sound was unlike any I had known. Not loud, but deep, resonant, and hollow in the truest sense, as though the air itself had been scooped out to make room for the tone. It vibrated in my chest, in my teeth, in my very skull. When it ceased, I heard another sound layered beneath the echo, a whisper, soft yet clear. Jonathan. 6. The figure. From that moment, I began to see him. At first, it was only in the corners of my sight. A man tall and thin, his face blurred, standing at the far end of the corridor. Then, in mirrors, his features sharpened, pale skin stretched over high cheekbones, eyes black as the space between stars, and a mouth that moved in time with the tolling of the bell. He did not speak aloud. Yet, in the toll's fading hum, his voice lived. Come to me. 7. The tower ascent on the final night, I could resist no longer. My feet moved without conscious will, carrying me up the spiral staircase of the western spire. The air grew colder with each step, until frost laced the stone walls. At the top hung the hollow bell. Its surface was not smooth but alive with writhing reliefs, faces in mid-scream, arms reaching from the metal as if to grasp the air. Beneath it stood the figure. And now I knew his face, for it was mine, aged and wasted, the eyes hollow, the smile thin and cruel. 8. The binding. When the bell tolled, I felt my body weaken. My breath misted in the freezing air, my heartbeat slowed. The figure stepped forward, and as his hands touched my chest, I felt myself being drawn out, pulled into the bell's hollow body. The last thing I saw was the bell's inner surface, slick with a darkness that reflected no light. Now I hang within it, one more face among the writhing forms, whispering to those who will come after me, the bell has not tolled again. It is waiting. The bells of Meow Street. It was on a damp November evening that I arrived in the city of Asheford, a small, brooding settlement along the eastern coast of the United States, one that, even in daylight, seemed draped in a perpetual funeral shroud of mist. I had come on business, to collect certain municipal records, and intended to stay no longer than a night. Yet, the manner in which the city pressed its chill upon me made me feel as though I had already overstayed some invisible welcome. The streets were cobblestone, slick from a rain that had not yet fallen. The lamps, tall, iron, and skeletal, burned with a trembling, yellow glow, as if they feared to fully pierce the darkness. My lodgings were to be found on Meow Street, so named, I was told, because the ground beneath was said to contain bones from a long-forgotten epidemic burial ground. My host was a gaunt man by the name of Mr. Anselm Core, who spoke with a slow, deliberate diction, as if each word had to pass inspection before it left his lips. You will hear bells, he said as he handed me the iron key to my room. No matter the hour. You must not answer them. This, naturally, demanded inquiry, but Core turned away before I could press him further. My quarters were on the 3rd floor, narrow, coffin-like, with walls the color of wet parchment. The single window opened upon an alley, but the air that drifted in was cold in a way that seemed older than the weather. Against the far wall stood an ornate grandfather clock, its face blackened as though scorched, though it ticked in perfect rhythm. At precisely midnight, the bells began. The bells, they did not ring as church bells do, bold and clear, but rather in a muted, strangled fashion, as though sounding from beneath the earth. 3 slow tolls, then silence. Moments later, from somewhere deep in the building, I heard the echo of footsteps, deliberate, dragging, growing closer to my door. That I remembered Mr. Core's warning, you must not answer them. The footsteps stopped outside my room. Then came the knocking. It was not with a fist, but with something harder, sharper, like bone tapping on wood. The bells tolled again. This time, I felt the vibration in my chest. The voice, I do not know why, perhaps some ancient flaw in my will, but I spoke. Who is there? The answer came in a whisper that scraped the air like a blade across stone. It is your turn. The door did not open, yet the cold in the room deepened until my breath hung in the air like smoke. The grandfather clock, without warning, struck 13, each chime louder, heavier, until the glass on the window began to quiver. The descent drawn as though by invisible hands, I left my bed and stepped into the hallway. The lamps along Meow Street had all gone out, save for one, far in the distance, swaying in a wind I could not feel. The bells tolled again, now in rapid succession, leading me toward the basement of the boarding house. There, in the suffocating dark, I found the source, a massive bronze bell, half buried in the earth, its surface crawling with carvings that twisted in the corner of my vision. Around it, figures knelt, thin, pale, their faces masked with tarnished silver. They turned toward me as one. The toll one of them, a woman, though her eyes were gone, took my hand and pressed it against the bell. The moment my skin touched the cold metal, I saw them, the dead of Taxonford, thousands of them, buried beneath Marrow Street, all with mouths open in a silent scream. The bell tolled again, and I knew I was counted among them now. I awoke in my bed at dawn, yet something was wrong. Outside my window, the city bustled, but no one looked up. No one spoke my name. When I turned to the mirror, the glass showed an empty room, and from somewhere beneath the floorboards, the bells began again. The Lamplighter of Blackfriars, London, winter of 1891. The fog rolled in from the Thames like a living thing, slow, deliberate, swallowing sound and smothering the city beneath its damp, yellowed veil. It was the sort of fog that made even familiar streets feel like a labyrinth, where the gas lamps glowed like dying embers in a cold fireplace. Evelyn Harrington, a young governess recently dismissed from her post in Chelsea, had taken a modest lodging above a bakery in Blackfriars. She carried her meager possessions in a small satchel and her pride in her posture, though the January chill was slowly breaking both. That evening, the city was quieter than usual. The only noise was the rhythmic drip of water from the rooftops and the faint lap of the river against the embankment. Evelyn quickened her pace along Queen Victoria Street, keeping her head down, until movement ahead caught her attention. A man stood beneath a tall lamppost, his silhouette cut sharp against the fog. He was impossibly tall, or perhaps the lamplight distorted him, and wore a heavy coat that nearly brushed the cobbles. With slow precision, he ascended a small iron ladder, reached the glass globe of the gas lamp, and lit it with a long iron rod tipped in a dull, wavering flame. But something was wrong. The lamp flared to life, then flickered and went dark almost instantly. She thought it a trick of the wind, but as she walked further, she noticed the same pattern. The lamplighter would move to the next post, light it, and it would die moments after he passed. Even stranger was his shadow. It stretched along the cobbles far longer than the lamplight could account for, curling like smoke, bending around corners it had no right to touch. Evelyn forced herself past him, eyes fixed ahead. Yet curiosity betrayed her. She glanced up into the just-extinguished lamp as she passed. What she saw stopped her breath. Inside the glass globe, instead of an empty mantle, there was a pale, distorted face. Pressed against the inside, its skin had the translucence of candle wax. It had no eyes, only sunken, smooth hollows, but its mouth was stretched impossibly wide into a grin that showed far too many teeth. She stumbled back, blinking. The face was gone. The lamp was empty again. That night, Evelyn lay in her narrow bed above the bakery. The smell of bread, usually comforting, did nothing to banish the metallic tang that had settled in her throat. She couldn't shake the image of that eyeless grin. Her window overlooked the street, and against her better judgment, she kept looking out. At midnight, the lamplighter returned. But now, his rod bore no flame. Instead of lighting the lamps, he snuffed them out one by one, his gloved hand brushing the glass. Each lamp died like a drowning candle, leaving the street below in an unnatural blackness. At 3 o'clock, she woke again, not to darkness but to a faint glow inside her room. Her eyes adjusted slowly, and she froze. There, in the corner, stood a single gas lamp. It should have been impossible. The ceiling was too low, the floor too fragile to hold such weight, but there it was, its glass globe trembling with a dim, yellow light. And inside that light, a face. The same face, pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. The smile widened as Evelyn's breath quickened. She tried to scream, but the air in her lungs turned cold and heavy, as though the fog had poured directly into her chest. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the lamplighter's long shadow stretching across her floor. When morning came, the baker downstairs found her room empty. The bed was unmade, her satchel gone, and the window ajar. No one in Blackfriars saw Evelyn Harrington again, but the lamplighter's route grew longer. Residents whispered that, on certain fog-heavy nights, you could watch the lamps in Blackfriars go out one by one, moving steadily closer to where you stood. If you're foolish enough to linger, the lamplighter will pass, and the next lamp will glow just for you, and inside it, smiling, will be the face of someone you once knew.